Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much. This is a great crowd for our first Speaking of History. Now, I am really happy to introduce Mr. Rick Moock here. He was with the 97th Regimental String Band, for 35 years.
Thank you.
They traveled all over the country, from California to Rhode Island, from almost Canada to Texas, Florida, and pretty much everywhere in between, right? Okay, well, that's all I'm going to say about him. You guys are going to get a lot of chance to hear about his stories as he shares with you information about popular music during the Civil War. So thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Laura. Before I begin my actual bloviation here, I want to suggest to you, many of you are attuned to history, especially local history here, or other history. And I want to suggest to you that if you have any other ideas for Speaking of History programs, that you should call Laura here at the Heritage Village, because there's always opportunities for speakers and demonstrations and other things in this lovely air-conditioned room. Anyway, thank you all for coming. If I seem unsteady, that's because I am. I'm old. This was not what they promised me. I remember a poem from many years ago, if I can enlighten you with it. It says, "Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be, the last of life, for which the first was made." Not hardly true. How many of you have seen the world-famous 97th Regimental String Band play? All right, so many, wonderful. And you're still here, that's great. To those of you old and young, welcome. I'm going to sit down for most of this, obviously. When the Civil War broke out, there weren't any Civil War songs. Poor government planning, as usual. But it didn't take American songwriters long to come up with things. The American Civil War, just to quote you some statistics, was the beginning of America's songwriting industry. That's hard to believe for modern people, especially young people, because there were no recordings. The only recorded music you could get was a music box, you know, a little tinkly, tinkly, tinkly thing. But there was no phonographs, no radio, obviously no TV, no nothing like that. If you wanted music back then, you had to sing it yourself with the voice that God gave you. And if you were fortunate enough to have a musical instrument knowledge, then that could help too. Now, Americans were very, very fortunate at this time of history, in the 1860, because by this time, American industry had figured out how to make inexpensive pianos, and so a lot of parlors had pianos in them, and people who played piano, and a lot of kids who, as we used to say, who took piano lessons could play that, and parlor guitars. There were plenty of those around. That was the ladies' instrument. And of course, for those scurrilous young men, the banjo, ooh, we don't want to mention the banjo, because that was a minstrel instrument. That was something from the big city. But there was plenty of music around. And where did you find this music? Well, you could listen to it at the music halls in cities, small towns, or when the minstrel show came to town, and there were hundreds of these minstrel troupes. gangs of men, usually from anyway from 5 to 10 in a group, would go from town to town in a wagon, bring their musical instruments with them, and rent out a building for a night and play the latest songs from New York City or from Boston. And you could go for 5 cents or 10 cents, and you'd have a whale of a show. And all sorts of music, mostly comedy songs. Occasionally they'd have a real good singer, a tenor or somebody, a female impersonator who would sing one of the latest love songs. And you heard the song there. So you remembered that song, you took it home, and maybe you could buy the music for it within a few weeks. Now, even without radio or TV, it was estimated that a song, newly written song in New York City, picked up by a minstrel show, could make it all the way to St. Louis in about 3 weeks. The minstrel shows moved that fast. They would sing and then they'd go on to the next town. Ba-dum, ba-dum. So there was a need for written music. America's songwriting population grew. Anybody who could write music dashed off a tune. And the Civil War was certainly a subject matter for the new and old songwriters. It wasn't now the boys that went into the Army. Some of them already played musical instruments, and they brought their musical instruments with them, guitars and mandolins and banjos and such, and they would play the songs that they knew. But it wasn't long before songs came out of publishing houses like Root and Katie in Chicago, and the New York houses, many of them too numerous to mention. Most of the music, and we have all of this music someplace. When we started the band, we had to find some of these songs, and it wasn't easy. Luckily, there was a book called Singing Soldiers, which came out after the war, in which the soldiers themselves listed the songs that they liked the most, and a lot of times the music and the words was included in that book, so that helped a lot. But it wasn't often all that reliable. Sometimes you had to go back to the original sheet music. Where can you find that? Well, the public library, believe it or not. Many of these songs were published as sheet music, words and lyrics on a couple of pages. And if you bought that music, you kept it in your house and you put it in a collection. And when you passed away, your relatives donated that collection to a library. So one of the sources we found for songs was a collection called the Levy collection, L-E-V-Y collection, which was given to the Eisenhower Library at Johns Hopkins University. One particular song that we really wanted to play, wanted to learn, and we wanted the original version of it. So I called them up at the Levy Library, and they sent me the music, which was great. Let's talk about some of the songs themselves. You can, right off the top of your head, name a Civil War song over there. Anybody? Shenandoah, Goober Peas. Speak up.
Roll, Alabama, roll.
Roll, Alabama, roll. Dixie. Anybody else?
Tenting Tonight.
Tenting Tonight on the old campground. Anything else?
Just Before the Battle.
Just Before the Battle, Mother. Yes. Rose of Alabama. Yeah. Lincoln and Liberty. What's that?
Bonnie Blue.
Bonnie Blue Flag. Well, that's about the extent of it. Well, you guys got a lot to learn. You got a lot of CDs to buy here. Well, let me start right at the beginning. As I say, there were songs that were out there already. Songs like Rose of Alabama, songs like The Yellow Rose of Texas, all sorts of songs. And luckily, this was the instrument which many soldiers carried with them. Invented by Jacob Hohner in Germany, his company still makes these, in 1840. And this was a very popular instrument, and you can see why. If the soldiers wanted to carry around an instrument, they're not going to lug a bass fiddle or a pipe organ with them. They're going to take a harmonica in their pocket, and they're going to play a song which Goober Peas. You know that? Now this, you may want to plug up some of the young children's ears, if there are any young children. I see one or two in here. When I tell you, if you know the words to Goober Peas, sitting by the roadside on a summer's day, chatting with my messmates, passing time away, lying in the shadows underneath the trees, goodness how delicious, eating Goober Peas. Talking about peanuts, of course. Peanuts, peanut was a goober pea. Just before the battle, the general hears a row. He says, "The Yanks are coming, I hear their rifles now." He turns around in wonder, and what do you think he sees? The Georgia militia eating goober peas. Now, if you think about that, just the littlest bit, that song, which was written during the Civil War, we don't know who wrote it. It was variously ascribed to A. Pinder, which is, Pinder is another name for a peanut, but anonymous. It was basically about farting. You eat enough peanuts, and all of a sudden you get a lot of flatulence, and that's what the general heard in back of him. He thought it was the Yankees' rifle, but it was the Georgia militia eating goober peas. So that was a very early, fun comic song that the soldiers liked. There were a lot of comic songs, most of which made fun of officers. But there were a great many songs that were sentimental, and songs about, I heard one just before the battle, Mother. I don't know if I can play that one. Well, I got it on tape here someplace. I could play that for you. It was written by George F. Root of Chicago, Root and Katie. Oh, I do know it.
Just before the battle, Mother, I am thinking most of you. While upon the field we're watching, with the enemy in view, comrades brave are round me lying, filled with thoughts of home and God. For well they know that on the morrow some will sleep beneath the sun. Farewell, Mother. not forget me. If I'm numbered with the slain. Oh, I long to see you, Mother, and the loving ones at home. But I'll never leave our banner till in honor I can come. Tell the traitors all around you that their cruel words we know. In every battle kill our soldiers by the help they give the foe. Farewell, Mother, you may never press me to your heart again. But oh, you'll not forget me, Mother. You will not forget me. If I'm numbered with the slain. Hark, I hear the bugle sounding. 'Tis the signal for the fight. Now may God protect us, Mother, as He ever does the right. Hear the battle cry of freedom, how it swells upon the air. Oh yes, we'll rally round the standard, or we'll perish nobly there. Farewell, Mother, you may never press me to your heart again. But oh, you'll not forget me, Mother, not forget me, if I'm numbered with the slain.
Okay, just before, what a sad song. What a sad song. A professionally written song. Again, George F. Root. Once the soldiers heard the song, they made it their own. They learned it, they sang it, and these were, for the most part, young kids, 18 to 30 years old, who had good voices and they could sing, and they sang these songs with harmonies there in the camps. But just before the battle, Mother, I am thinking most of you. It was the family. They wanted to be, back with their families as soon as they could. They wanted the war to be over. This goes for North and or South. They wanted to be home. They didn't want to be there doing what the officers told them to do. They wanted to be home. Mother took up a lot of space in the song lexicon. There was, of course, the vacant chair. Oh, God. I mean, that almost brings a tear to my eye every time I hear it. We shall meet, but we shall miss him. There will be one vacant chair. We shall linger to caress him when we breathe our evening prayer. Lieutenant William Grout was killed at one of the very first battles of the Civil War at Ball's Bluff in Virginia, and it made the newspapers. Everything made the newspapers back then, unlike today. But this song, "The Vacant Chair," was written about him. How sad, Here we are sitting around the supper table, and there's one chair here, which is empty. It's his chair. He won't ever be there again. Sentiment was a big part of it. Not that the soldiers spent all their time crying, but a good deal of it they spent thinking about home and God and Mother. there's a story about one soldier who was on the operating table, being cared for by some of the surgeons at one of the battles. I don't know which one. It was in mid-war sometime, and he knew he was going to die. He knew it. The surgeons gave him no hope, and he knew he was going to die. And as his friends gathered around him, what was on his mind? What do you think was on his mind? Who will care for my mother? Who will take care of mother? And the song, of course, is who will care for mother now that I am gone? So a lot of these men, young and middle-aged, even the older ones, they saw it as their duty to care for their parents or their loved ones, and they knew that they weren't going to be able to do that. It was so the music reflected that. So it was quiet. There were some generic sad songs from a great composer, one of America's greatest composers, Stephen Foster, who wrote lots of songs that we don't even know how many. Actually, we do, but I don't remember. There were quite a few. A lot of things I don't remember. You find that's happening? But he wrote all of his music, and then he had the good grace to die in 1864. So we know that all of his songs are period Civil War correct songs. We could sing them with 100% accuracy. But he wrote one of the best folk songs, well, it's a folk song now, Hard Times Come Again No More. You know, hard times come again no more. And it's not about the war, it's just about poor people trying to make a living. And they wanted, better times to come. So that was a great popular song. The soldiers changed it around because, again, these were kids, and you couldn't keep them sad for very long. So they took a song like Hard Times Come Again No More, and they changed it to Hard Tack Come Again No More. Now, hardtack, I don't know if I have one. I don't have one with me. Hardtack is a biscuit. It looks like a cracker. It's about yay by yay. And they were made in factories back in the cities, and then they were packaged in the thousands in boxes and shipped to the soldiers. It was bread, but it was unleavened, so it was it didn't go bad, but it didn't go good either. There was no salt, no sugar, no taste. See, some fellows who have been in the Navy, so they know what I'm talking about. Ship's biscuits or something like that. And they were very hard, very hard. So, but the soldiers changed the whole song, Hard Times Come Again No More. Let us close our game of poker, take our tin cups in our hands, while we all gather around the cook's tent door to eat mummies of hard crackers, handed to each man. Oh, hardtack, come again no more. And it turned into a comic song. So it was a sad song turned into a comic song. I heard somebody mention Alabama, roll, Alabama, roll. It's still around, isn't it? Huh? Fight song for the University of Alabama. Roll, Alabama, roll. It's there. That was about the famous battle between the Alabama and the Kearsarge off the coast of France. When the war first broke out, of course, there were some already made songs that just fit like a glove. There was Dixie, which was written before the war. It's a love song, believe it or not. It has nothing to do with the war. It has nothing to do with the South or the North, other than the name Dixie. It's basically about a guy who marries a girl and then leaves her hanging, runs out on her. Old Mistress Mary Wildeweber, William was a gay deceiver. Look away, Dixieland. Old Mrs. acted the foolish part and died for a man that broke her heart. Look away, Dixieland. It was a minstrel song. It was Dan Emmett and his minstrels had made great money with that song on the stage, And it was there was a Union version of it. Of course, the Union soldiers didn't want to sing anything that said smacked of Dixieland, particularly, so they'd say it. So they changed the words to suit their purposes. Wish I was in the land of traitors, rattlesnakes and alligators. Look away, Dixieland. Now, as a band, we only sang one version of a song, because if you've ever been in a musical group, you know how easily your mind can get confuselated in the middle of a song, and you find yourself, oh man, which version was I singing? And before you know it, you're up the creek without a paddle, going flabba-dabba-dabba. So any of us musicians are here, we know what I'm talking about. So Dan Emmett, he wrote the song in 1860, before the war, year before the war, 1859 actually. One of the most interesting stories about songs that were written for public consumption and very popular during the war was a story of an Englishman who wrote a song for the English music hall stage. Now, what happened was people learned these songs not by buying a CD or a record or anything. None of that was available, but they listened to it. And they listened to it as many times as they could. Now, this song was so popular, was so good, so well written, 3 verses to the song, and it was in a London show. But because the audience liked the song so much, what they would do is they would applaud rhythmically like that. The whole audience would do that, and so that they don't do that now. But if the audience was doing that, the cast would stop the show and they would sing the song again. The orchestra would play it again, and they'd sing it again. Routinely, this song was so popular that the audience demanded it be sung 7 times as the most that they sang it, all 3 verses. And of course, when they left, the audience knew the song, all 3 verses. The song was Home Sweet Home. Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. And after that, you can see on everybody's walls where some knitted things that says Home Sweet Home on it, or, you know, and that was where we get the expression home, sweet home. Home was where they wanted to be. The soldiers wanted to be home. How did they get there? It was a long road. As the one song that we play here, and they did, was Richmond is a hard road to travel. You can't quite get there in a straight line. You got to go all around the barn till you get there. A few more sad songs. All Quiet Along the Potomac. That song developed out of a poem. It was a poem first, and many songs came from poetry. Somebody would write a poem about nearly everything, you know, the war, North, the South, officers, birds, dogs, doorknobs, anything. And the poem would get published in a magazine or a newspaper, and somebody would set it to music. If it was a good poem, somebody would set it to music. So this was a poem, All Quiet Along the Potomac, and it's a sad song of a guy on picket duty. He's out there watching the front lines when he's shot. At the very end of the song, he's shot and killed. You know, no, Mary, goodbye, as his last breath is leaving him. But it was turned into a song after the poem was published. So again, that was a very sad one. The song that I wanted to get from the Levy collection was a song called 20 Years Ago. It was a song that Abraham Lincoln was roundly criticized for liking. Now, Lincoln, of course, was criticized for near about everything. It's because he was tall. People don't realize that. Everybody resented. People back then were fairly short, so when they saw a tall person, they naturally naturally picked on him. So, no, that's not true. They picked on Lincoln because he was Lincoln. But after the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest single day of the Civil War, when Lincoln was touring the battlefield, what was left of the battlefield, and General McClellan was sitting in the tent doing nothing. And Lincoln was in his carriage, and he had his friend, Ward Layman, who was his bodyguard and also played banjo and accompanied him, sing a song called 20 Years Ago. Now, we don't, the newspapers picked this up and criticized Lincoln for singing this sentimental yet jaunty song when he's touring a battlefield with all the death and dying and destruction there. But it's really a charming song, and we'd read the words, and so we got the original music and learned it. I wandered to the village Tom, I sat beneath the tree, upon the schoolhouse playing ground which sheltered you and me. But none were there to greet me, Tom, and few were left to know that played with us upon the grass some 20 years ago. Now, today we don't think of 20 years as too long a time, you know, but back then it could be a whole life, you know, it could be and twice that as normally when people passed away. But it's a great little song. Again, the sentiments are so very genuine. At the end of the song, the man stops. I visited the old churchyard and took some flowers to strew upon the graves of those we loved some 20 years ago. You know, remembering the times past, the people past. So some of these songs were so very sentimental and homesick. Songs like Lorena, the years creep slowly by, Lorena, or as Willie Nelson says, Lorena. That was a very, very popular song in the South and in the North. Home Sweet Home, that Home Sweet Home and Lorena share one characteristic in common. The officers tried to prevent the troops and the bands from playing and singing these songs because they thought that it encouraged desertion, and it may well have done that. But both of the songs shared a distinction of being favorites, and they were. I mean, the stories abound, and you can in the books, and you can read about the soldiers, especially in front of the most notable example is in front of Petersburg. At the siege of Petersburg, where the lines were static and went on for months and months and months. But every night, supposedly a Confederate trumpeter would come up on the parapets of Petersburg and play Lorena and Home Sweet Home. You know, and nobody would shoot at him. No sharpshooters would shoot at him because they wanted to hear the music. They loved this song so much. And there were many other instances of that. Bands, there were bands with the troops. Good heavens, there were bands. They had their own string bands. Our band, the 97th Regimental String Band, was taken from the 97th Pennsylvania Infantry while they were at Fort Clinch, which is one of the little known and less visited gems in Florida park system, up in the upper right-hand corner of Florida, Fort Clinch State Park, while the 97th Pennsylvania was stationed there. But we know, I have the regimental history, and it mentions that while the troops were stationed at Fort Clinch, the officers went to a dance in town where the regimental band, fifes and drums and trumpets and trombones and such, played for them, while the string band played for the troops in the fort. So we know that there was a 97th Regimental String Band, and we fashioned ourselves on them. But the tunes they had were the tunes which were always available. If the soldiers couldn't get out to get them, the sutlers had them. A sutler was a tradesman who each regiment of troops was assigned a sutler, a guy who sold the soldiers stuff that they couldn't get from the supply sergeant. You know, things like tobacco, no liquor, except out the back of the tent, but writing paper, ink, all sorts of things that the soldiers couldn't get from the supply sergeant. So they could also get sheet music there if the sutler had any, and so they would learn new songs. Or there was something called a dime songster. It was just a little thing, and it didn't have any music in it because most people couldn't read music anyway, but it had the words. If you wanted all the words to Yankee Doodle, there they were, right in that dime songster. And the soldiers could carry those in their pockets. So they knew the words and they knew the tunes already. Both sides found Yankee Doodle a very popular song because it harkened back to a time when Yankees and rebels were on the same side. Think about it. We were all Yankees and we were all rebels at the same time there. So the sutlers could do that. There were songs written that were giveaways. You know, if you bought a song, a sheet music song, you got a free song from this guy. And the song I'm thinking of is called Tramp, Tramp, Tramp. Tramp, 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 the boys are marching. Cheer up, comrades, they will come. In the prison cell I sit, thinking, mother dear of you. There's mother again. Isn't she always in the song? But Tramp, Tramp, Tramp was there. Now, Tramp, Tramp, Tramp had a life of its own after the war. Jesus loves the little children. It became a hymn. So all these songs were there. Not all of them carried on. During the Civil War, it was estimated that some 6,000 songs were written just during the 4 years of war. Most of them are pretty terrible. If you find them someplace and you find somebody who'll play them for you, some of them are either derivative of other songs or they're just terrible. Because again, most people couldn't write music. They would take a song that they already knew and maybe change a few notes, and they could publish it themselves and put their own words to it, which would make it very, very saleable for them. One of the great songs that comes to mind is Johnny Comes Marching Home. Now, when you think about, ask to name a Civil War song, Johnny Comes Marching Home may not come right to mind, but it's right there. Patrick Gilmore was an Irishman who came to this country, and before the war he had a band, a brass band that they would go from town to town and play and get money that way. And he wrote this song in 1863, Johnny Comes Marching Home. Now, he didn't use his own name, didn't put his own name on it, because a lot of people didn't, when they wrote a song, didn't put their own name on it, because in case it was terrible, they didn't want it to reflect back on them. If they wrote another song and brought it to the public, oh, you wrote that bombshell. No, we don't want that. So he wrote, he put it under a different name, Lewis something or other. But it proved, and he wrote it because when Johnny Comes Marching Home, they thought in '63 that the war would be over in that year. It didn't. It went on for 2 more years. But he had a song written, and it became very popular. You see it, almost every orchestra has some version of Johnny Comes Marching Home in it, some orchestration, some written. If you remember the movie Stalag 17 with William Holden, you know, the American POWs, they're always humming, and the songs in the background. It's a rousing tune, you know. And we all remembered from our school days, the ants go marching one by one, hurrah, hurrah. The little one stops to suck his thumb, hurrah, hurrah. Or the teacher, there's something about a teacher too, I can't remember that one. I blocked out of my mind, I used to be a teacher. It was even used, we got in a Bruce Willis movie, the third Die Hard movie, where they're taking all the dump trucks full of gold underneath New York City. I don't know if you remember that scene or that section. All the bad guys have loaded up the dump trucks with all the bullion from the Federal Reserve, and they're driving it underneath New York City. The music they're playing is Johnny Comes Marching Home. No, and because you didn't need to pay any royalties to that one, there it is. It's just out there for everybody to enjoy. And the nice thing about it is, like Yankee Doodle, you can write your own words to it. Isn't that neat? And the kids particularly like that. If you want to write words to it, you take a song that you already know and put your own words to it. Have a good time with it. I was thinking of Walter Kittredge. Yeah, poor old Walter. He got drafted in the draft 1863, and he reported to the draft board and found out that he had rheumatic fever, so he was ineligible for the draft. So he went home and wrote a song about his near-death experience, either getting drafted or, so many guys were getting killed. He was, glad he had a family, wife and kids. So he was glad he wasn't drafted. But he wrote, "Tenting on the old campground. We're tenting tonight on the old campground. Give us a song to cheer our weary hearts, song of home." There's home again. "And friends we love so dear." It's always either home or mother in the song. They were the most popular ones. And he took this song around and tried to get it published. And all the publishers, "No way, get out of here. That's a sad song. We want this to be a happy war, We want happy songs. Get out of here with your gloom and doom." So nobody would publish this thing. So he went to a singing family called the Hutchinsons. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but if you Google them, you can find out all about them. Googling is just a wonderful thing. But them Hutchinsons, it was a family of singers. 3 women and 2 brothers. They were all brothers and sisters. They were out of New England, and they went around to the various army camps in the north and put on concerts, free of charge for the soldiers. The soldiers would contribute money to them if they had any money, and the Hutchinsons took this song, "Tenting on the Old Campground," from Walter Kittredge, and it became very popular, all because of the Hutchinson family. The Hutchinson family, you might not recall them, but at the very end of the Civil War, after the war was all over, they put on a concert in Washington, D.C., for 10,000 people, unamplified, in probably in a rotunda kind of thing, like Carter Barron Amphitheater, someplace like that. But 10,000 people, unamplified. And of course, people sang along too, but people listened back then also, which is nice. You people have been very patient. You're listening to my ramblings here. There were all sorts of examples of songs written that became famous, and most of it has died away. We don't have much of it anymore. That's why anytime that there's groups like ours or the 2nd South Carolina String Band or anybody like that who plays this music, it's very important to keep these songs alive in front of people at Civil War reenactments or concerts or wherever, you know, people will stop and listen. A lot of stuff is taken from the Irish lexicon, and this one in particular is I know the tune's running around your head now. The Minstrel Boy.
The minstrel boy to the war is gone. In the ranks of death you will find him. His father's sword he hath girded on, and his wild heart strong behind him. Land of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betrays thee, one sword at least thy rights shall guard, one faithful heart shall praise thee.
You see, it's a song which wasn't obviously not written for the Civil War, but there were so many Irish troops in the armies of the North and the South that the Irish songs were very popular, very, very popular. Now, there was one group of immigrants that was actually more numerous in their volunteering for the, especially the armies of the North, more numerous than the Irish. Can you guess who? Germans. Germans, especially from St. Louis, which was mostly Germans, and they volunteered in great numbers. But no matter what, where they came from, they learned their English as quickly as they could, and they learned to fight as best they could, and they stayed with it. This is one of the ones that is one of my favorites. We think it's post-war, but maybe not. We don't know.
One morning and the office had opened, a man quite old in years stood by the express office showing signs of grief and tears. And as the clerk approached him, these trembling words did say, I'm waiting for my boy, sir, he's coming home today. Well, you have made a slight mistake, but you must surely know that this is a telegraph office, sir, and not the town depot. And if your boy is a-comin' home, the clerk did smile and say, you'll find him with the passengers at the station just over the way. No, you do not understand me, sir. The old man shook his head. He's coming not as a passenger, but by express instead. He's a-coming home to mother. The old man gently said, he's coming home in a casket, sir. He's coming to us dead. Whistle pierced their ears, express train, someone cried. The old man rose in a breathless daze and quickly rushed outside. And then a long white casket was lowered to the ground, and showing signs of grief and tears to them as gathered round. He said, do not use him roughly, boys, it contains our darling Jack. He went away as you boys are, this way he's coming back. He broke his dear old mother's heart, her sayings have all come true. She said it's the way that he'd come home if he joined the boys in blue.
Very sad song. Very sad song. One of our favorite songwriters is Henry Clay Work. Now, Henry Clay Work from Connecticut, his family were great abolitionists. They believed that the Civil War was going to be the end of Negro slavery in America. It was going to just be the finish of it. He wrote a lot of songs, too, some of which you're familiar with, a song called The Ship That Never Returned. Ever hear that one? Did it ever return? No, he never returned, and his fate is still unlearned. That's The Ship That Never Returned, Henry Clay Work from 1865. It turned into Charlie on the MTA, for sure. But it's there. I mean, that's what it was. He wrote My Grandfather's Clock, which was a post-war song, 1876. Before Henry Clay Work wrote My Grandfather's Clock, they were known as floor clocks. After that song, they were known as grandfather clocks. Stopped short, never to go again when the old man died. Again, another sad song, but it was jaunty. Thank you. And I want to finish by mentioning the king. You know who I'm talking about. Thank you. Thank you very much. When Elvis made a movie, his first movie, as a matter of fact, they set it in the Civil War. And he wanted a song from that era, a song that he could copyright, he and the Colonel could copyright, which you can't copyright any of the old tunes because it's all public domain. So he took an old song called Ora Lee. It's a lovely old tune, little love song. Changed it to Love Me Tender. But if you want the original version of Love Me Tender, it's Ora Lee, and it's on here. But anyway, that concludes my presentation for today. Thanks for sticking around.